Next up, we're going to dive into the dark world of elite social circles and how they can enable serial abusers like Jeffrey Epstein. I'm your host, and today we're exploring the fascinating yet disturbing topic of the Epstein Enigma, unraveling the social networks that enable abuse. You know, it's amazing how someone like Epstein could rub shoulders with the likes of Jes Staley, the former CEO of Barclays, and even royalty like Prince Andrew, despite his notorious reputation.
Right. I mean, what's really shocking is that these people knew about his past, or at least had some idea, and yet they still chose to associate with him. How does that happen? Was it a case of, he's a great guy, don't believe the rumors kind of thing?
Exactly, it's like, how could they not know? I mean, Epstein's history was pretty well documented, even back then. But you see, in these elite social circles, there's often a culture of silence and omerta, where people are willing to turn a blind eye to questionable behavior as long as it doesn't affect their own interests or reputation.
That's really interesting. So, you're saying it's like a big boys club where they protect each other's backs no matter what? Like I've heard stories about how some of these wealthy and powerful people will do whatever it takes to maintain their social status and avoid scandal.
That's right. It's all about maintaining the illusion of respectability and power. And you know, when someone like Epstein comes along, with his charisma and wealth, he can easily infiltrate these circles and manipulate people into doing his bidding, or at the very least, looking the other way.
I see. So, what about Jes Staley, for example? He's facing a court case now to clear his name from associations with Epstein. Do you think he's genuinely trying to distance himself, or is this just damage control?
Well, it's hard to say, but from what we know, Staley did have a pretty close relationship with Epstein, and he's admitted to making mistakes in the past. I think what's really important here is that we need to look at the systemic issues that allowed someone like Epstein to operate for so long without being held accountable.
Right. And, oh man, this makes me think of something. It's like, when people see others behaving in a certain way or associating with someone, they're more likely to do the same, even if it's questionable. Do you think that played a role in Epstein's ability to maintain these relationships?
Absolutely. Social proof is a powerful force, and when you have influential people like Prince Andrew or Jes Staley publicly associating with someone like Epstein, it sends a signal to others that he must be okay, that he's somehow vetted by the elite. It's a classic case of if they're friends with him, he must be fine.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what about Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, who's now releasing more files related to Epstein? Do you think this is going to shed some light on these social networks and how they enabled his abuse?
I definitely think so. The release of these files could be a game changer in terms of exposing the extent of Epstein's network and how it was able to operate for so long. And you know, it's interesting that Bondi mentioned there are over 250 alleged victims. That's just staggering.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's like a whole other level of horrific. And what about the fact that some of these influential people, like Prince Andrew, might be named in these files? Do you think that could lead to some real consequences for them?
Well, it's possible, but we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. One thing's for sure, though. The Epstein case has already shown us that even the most powerful people can be held accountable eventually. And if these files do reveal more about the social networks that enabled his abuse, that could be a major step towards preventing similar cases in the future.
Right? I mean, it's just so crazy to think about how all these different pieces fit together. The wealth, the power, the social status. It's like, what can we do to prevent this kind of thing from happening again? Is it even possible to dismantle these networks?
Great question. I think that's a topic for our next episode, actually. But for now, let's just say that it's going to take a lot of effort and scrutiny from all of us, law enforcement, and the public to hold these powerful individuals and social networks accountable and create a culture where abuse is not tolerated or enabled.
Yeah, that makes sense. And oh man, I just had another thought. What about the role of money in all this? Like, how did Epstein's wealth play into his ability to maintain these relationships and avoid accountability?
That's a fantastic question. We'll definitely have to explore that further. But for now, let's just say that wealth and power can be a very toxic combination, especially when it comes to enabling abuse. Next up, we're discussing the Jeffrey Epstein scandal and the role of Ghislaine Maxwell in enabling his crimes. I'm your host, and today we're going to dive into the dark world of sex trafficking and exploitation. Get ready for a conversation that's both disturbing and enlightening.
Right? I've heard of Jeffrey Epstein, but I don't know much about Ghislaine Maxwell. Who is she? Exactly.
Ah, great question. Ghislaine Maxwell was Jeffrey Epstein's longtime partner and associate. She's a British socialite and heiress to a vast fortune, and her role in enabling Epstein's crimes is still being uncovered. It's a fascinating yet terrifying story of how women can be complicit in and benefit from systems of exploitation and abuse.
That's so... I don't know, it's just hard to wrap my head around. How did she meet Epstein, and what was her involvement in his crimes?
Well, Ghislaine Maxwell met Jeffrey Epstein in the early 1990s, and they quickly became romantically involved. She introduced him to her high society friends and helped him build his network of powerful associates. But as we now know, she also played a crucial role in recruiting and grooming young girls for Epstein's sex trafficking ring.
Oh my god. That's... wow. I had no idea. So she was like a recruiter or something?
Exactly. Ghislaine Maxwell would often pose as a friendly, trustworthy figure to these young girls, gaining their trust and then introducing them to Epstein. She'd promise them modeling jobs or scholarships or other opportunities, and then, well, you can imagine what would happen next.
Right. I think I'm starting to get it. But what about her background? What made her the way she is?
Ah, great question. Ghislaine Maxwell's father was Robert Maxwell, a wealthy and influential publisher. She grew up with a sense of entitlement and privilege, and some people say that's what led her to believe she was above the law.
That makes sense, I guess. But what about the other women who were involved in Epstein's circle? Were they all complicit in his crimes?
Well, that's a great question. There were many women who were part of Epstein's social circle, and some of them have spoken out about their experiences. Some claim they had no idea what was going on, while others, well, let's just say they're still under investigation.
Right. Okay. I think I'm starting to understand the scope of this scandal. But what about Bill Gates? I've heard he was friends with Epstein or something.
Ah, yes. Bill Gates has indeed been linked to Jeffrey Epstein, and it's a pretty interesting story. Apparently, Gates met with Epstein several times, even after his conviction, and some people are still trying to figure out what their relationship was all about.
Whoa. Wow. I had no idea. So, do you think Bill Gates knew about Epstein's crimes?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. Gates has said he regretted his association with Epstein and claimed he was trying to help with global health philanthropy. But, as we know, Epstein was a master manipulator, so it's hard to say for sure.
Right. This is all just so mind-blowing. I feel like I'm learning about a whole different world here.
Exactly. The Jeffrey Epstein scandal is like a rabbit hole. The deeper you go, the more disturbing it gets. But it's essential to understand the complexities of these systems of exploitation and abuse, especially when it comes to the role of women like Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah. I think I need a minute to process all this. Can we take a break or something?
Ha! Fair enough. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dive even deeper into the world of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Stay tuned, folks. Next up, we're going to dive into the explosive topic of Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, and I'm titling this conversation Unraveling the Epstein-Trump Connection, a web of deceit and corruption. This is a story that has left many of us speechless, and today we're joined by a special guest who's going to help us unpack the intricacies of this scandal. So let's start with the basics. What do we know about Trump's association with Epstein, and why should we care?
Right. So, I've heard that Trump has called Epstein a terrific guy, and a lot of fun to be with. But isn't that just like a casual friendship or something? I mean, doesn't everyone have friends they don't totally agree with?
Ah, great question. But here's the thing. This wasn't just a casual friendship. Trump and Epstein were reportedly close friends for over 15 years, and Trump even attended parties at Epstein's mansion, including a notorious calendar girl competition at Mar-a-Lago. And let's not forget that Epstein was a convicted sex offender, with a history of abusing underage girls.
Okay. I see what you're saying. But didn't Trump also say some negative things about Epstein after he was arrested? Maybe he was just trying to distance himself from the guy?
That's true, but the problem is that Trump's comments about Epstein have been wildly inconsistent over the years. In 2002, he told New York Magazine that Epstein was a terrific guy and a lot of fun to be with, but after Epstein's arrest in 2019, Trump suddenly claimed that he didn't know him very well. It's like he's trying to have it both ways.
Right. So you're saying that Trump is trying to cover his tracks or something? But what about the whole deep state conspiracy theory that some of these MAGA influencers are pushing? Maybe there's more to the story than we're being told?
Laughs. Ah, the deep state theory. Yeah, that's a great point. Some people are trying to spin this as a conspiracy to take down Trump, but the fact remains that Epstein was a real person with a history of abuse, and Trump was friends with him. We need to focus on the facts, not some wild conspiracy theories.
Okay, got it. So, what about the documents that were supposed to be released? I heard they were just a bunch of old information that everyone already knew. Is that true?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's right. The Trump administration promised to release new information about Epstein's clients and flight logs, but all we got was a bunch of redundant info that didn't shed any new light on the situation. It's like they're trying to obfuscate the truth rather than provide real transparency.
That's really suspicious. I mean, don't you think that if Trump had nothing to hide, he would just release all the documents and be done with it? Instead, it seems like he's trying to hide something. Maybe we should be looking into his financial records or something.
Laughs. Ah. Now you're thinking like a real investigative journalist. Yes, that's exactly what we should be doing, following the money trail and seeing where it leads us. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about Trump's character or judgment. It's about accountability and making sure that those in power are held to the same standards as everyone else.
Right. So, what's the next step here? Are we going to see any real consequences for Trump or his associates? Or is this just going to get swept under the rug like everything else?
Well, that's a great question, and one that I think we'll be exploring in more depth as this story continues to unfold. But one thing's for sure, we need to keep pushing for transparency and accountability no matter where it leads us, because at the end of the day, the truth is what sets us free. Next up, we're diving into the controversy surrounding the release of the Epstein files, and I'm excited to explore this topic with you today. The release of these documents has been criticized for being more political theater than a genuine attempt at transparency, sparking debate about the role of politics in influencing the Justice Department's decision-making process. I mean, think about it. Attorney General Pam Bondi had been hyping up the release of these files for days, calling it breaking news on Fox News, and then when they finally came out, many people felt like it was a total letdown.
Right. So, what exactly was in these files that was supposed to be so groundbreaking? I mean, didn't we already know most of this stuff about Epstein?
Well, that's the thing. The documents mostly consisted of flight logs for Epstein's planes, which had already been made public, and contact information for hundreds of associates, along with brief descriptions of items found at his residences. It was like they were trying to create a big spectacle out of something that wasn't really that new or revealing.
Okay. So, it sounds like the Justice Department was trying to make a big show out of this, but didn't actually deliver anything substantial. That's really frustrating, especially for the victims and their families who are still seeking justice. I mean, can you think of any other examples where politics has influenced the Justice Department's decision-making process in a way that's similar to this?
Absolutely. I think one example that comes to mind is the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server during the 2016 presidential election. There were definitely allegations that the Justice Department was under pressure from the Trump administration to pursue the investigation more aggressively than they might have otherwise. And you know, it's interesting because in both cases you have this intersection of politics and justice where the lines get blurred and it's hard to know what's really going on.
That's a great point. And I think it's also worth noting that in the case of the Epstein files, there are still so many unanswered questions about what really happened and who was involved. Like, what about this whole idea of an Epstein client list that's been circulating on right-wing media platforms? Do you think there's any truth to that?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but from what we know, there's no concrete evidence to support the existence of a specific client list. I mean, the FBI has refused to release some documents related to the case, and the victims' lawyers have been pushing for more information to come out. But at the same time, it's also possible that the whole thing is just a conspiracy theory with no basis in reality.
Right. And I think what's so fascinating about this case is how it has become this kind of Rorschach test for people's beliefs about power and corruption. Like, some people see it as evidence of a deep state cover-up, while others see it as just a tragic example of how wealthy and powerful people can get away with awful things. What do you think is the most important thing that we can learn from this case?
For me, I think it's about the importance of transparency and accountability in our justice system. When you have cases like Epstein's, where there are so many powerful people involved, it's easy for things to get covered up or swept under the rug. But if we want to build trust in our institutions, we need to be willing to shine a light on the darkest corners of power and corruption, even if it's uncomfortable or difficult.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it's also important to consider the human cost of all this. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of victims who were abused by Epstein and his associates. How do you think we can balance the need for justice and accountability with the need to protect and support these victims?
That's a great question, and I think it's something that we should be discussing more widely. One thing that comes to mind is the importance of providing resources and support for survivors of trauma so that they feel empowered to come forward and share their stories. We also need to make sure that our justice system is set up in a way that prioritizes their needs and safety, rather than just focusing on punishing the perpetrators.
Right? And I think it's also worth considering how we can prevent these kinds of abuses from happening in the first place. Like, what role do you think power and privilege play in enabling this kind of behavior?
Oh, that's a huge question, and one that I think gets to the heart of a lot of our societal problems. When you have people who are wealthy and powerful, they often have a sense of invincibility, like they're above the law or can get away with anything. And that can create a culture where abuse and exploitation thrive. We need to be willing to challenge those power structures and hold people accountable, no matter how wealthy or influential they may be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's like we need to create a culture where everyone is held to the same standards, regardless of their background or status. And that means being willing to confront some really uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our society.
Next up, we're diving into the fascinating world of television and its ability to tackle tough topics, as seen in the latest season of The Good Fight, which I like to call the anatomy of a scandal. We're going to dissect how the show's creators, Robert and Michelle King, used the Jeffrey Epstein investigation as a metaphor for the systemic injustices that allow powerful people to get away with heinous crimes.
Right. So you're saying that the show is using Epstein's story to talk about something bigger, like how the system fails us.
Exactly. The Kings are highlighting how Epstein's case is a prime example of how those in power often receive preferential treatment, and the media plays a significant role in either exposing or covering up these injustices. I mean, think about it. Epstein's story is like a perfect storm of corruption and entitlement.
That's so true. I remember when the news broke out about Epstein, and everyone was shocked, but then it just seemed to fade away. Like, what happened to all the outrage?
Well, that's precisely what the show is exploring. The media can be complicit in letting powerful people off the hook. By weaving together fact and fiction, the Kings are able to shed light on the darker aspects of our society, like the conspiracy theories surrounding Epstein's death.
Oh man, those conspiracy theories were crazy. I mean, I've heard some wild stuff. Like, have you heard about the theory that Epstein was murdered because he had dirt on all these powerful people?
Laughs. Yes, I've heard that one too. And while it's easy to get caught up in speculation, the show does a great job of balancing those theories with real-world implications. For instance, did you know that the episode incorporates actual events and figures from Epstein's life, like his connection to Donald Trump and the fact that his jail cell cameras weren't working?
Whoa, really? That's messed up. So it's like the show is saying that even when we think we're getting to the truth, there are still all these layers of deception and corruption that can hide the real story.
Exactly. And that's what makes The Good Fight so compelling. It's not just a show about lawyers and court cases, it's a commentary on our society's willingness to turn a blind eye to injustice. The Kings are using their platform to spark important conversations and encourage critical thinking, much like how the character of Diane Lockhart uses her skills to fight against the system.
That makes sense. I can see how the show would want to inspire people to think more critically about what's going on in the world. But what about the whole Bud thing at the end of the episode? That was like totally out of left field.
Laughs? Ah, yes, the infamous Bud scene. Well, according to Robert King, that was a deliberate choice to comment on the absurdity and entitlement of men like Epstein, who think they can cheat death itself. It's a darkly comedic moment that leaves you questioning what it says about our society that we're still fascinated by these figures.
Right. I see what you mean now. It's like we're so caught up in the spectacle of it all that we forget to look at the bigger picture. Do Do you think the show will continue to explore these themes in future seasons?
Absolutely. The Kings have already hinted that they'll be delving deeper into the consequences of the events set in motion during this season. With any luck, we'll see more thought-provoking storylines that challenge our assumptions and push us to think critically about the world around us.
That would be amazing. I'm definitely going to keep watching to see where they take it. Do you think other shows will start tackling these kinds of topics too?
I hope so. The Good Fight is setting a high bar for television as a medium for social commentary. If more shows follow suit, we might just see a shift in the way we approach these difficult conversations and the impact they have on our culture.
That would be really cool. Can you imagine if TV shows started sparking real change?
Laughs! Well, stranger things have happened, but one thing's for sure. Meet The Good Fight leading the charge. We're in for some exciting and thought-provoking television.